Along with Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth here. Abe Foxman is with us, and we're also pleased to be joined now via Skype by Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, author of the book Terror Tunnels, The Case for Israel's Just War Against Hamas. Alan, welcome back to the program. And we have been discussing Harvey Weinstein's column that appeared on Newsmax.com. He spoke of the parallels between Paris 2015 and Nazi Germany, the Third Reich of the 30s and 40s. Abe Foxman takes some exception to what was written in that column. Your take on history possibly repeating itself?
Well, I have also publicly criticized my friend Harvey Weinstein for making that parallel. Things are very, very different. First of all, there is Israel with one of the strongest armies in the world capable of protecting itself and also helping protect Jewish communities around the world. Second, the dynamic is very different in Paris. We have three types of anti-Semitism that seem to sometimes overlap. And that is we have extreme Muslim anti-Semitism, which has resulted in the killings of people and the firebombings and that kind of thing. But then we have hard left anti-Zionism that often melds into anti-Semitism and gives extremists justification for attacking Jews every time they disagree with Israel's policy. And then, of course, there's the traditional hard right anti-Semitism that led to France turning over more Jews for deportation to Nazi death camps than even the Nazis asked for. And so these three are coming together in modern day France, which I think explains why so many Jews are wondering whether France is the future home of the large Jewish community it now has. So I think the situation is quite different, but obviously one can never forget the past.
Abe, I want to bring you back into the conversation. So earlier we were talking about that more Jews in France are leaving than ever before, and that last year alone they saw a 91% increase in anti-Semitic attacks. What do you believe is causing that increase?
Well, anti-Semitism has really never been catharsized out of European culture and French culture. But I really, as important as anti-Semitism is, I think the challenge is much greater. I think Europe is fighting for its own survival as a democratic continent. And what I see is absolute hypocrisy. The enemy is radical extremist Islam. When the president of France gets up and he says to the world, Islam has nothing to do with what happened in France, they're closing their eyes. This is hypocrisy. This is blindness. And that's the enemy of France and the Jewish community. The attacks on the Jewish community primarily have come, unfortunately, from the Muslim community. The ADL poll that we did showed that the highest level of anti-Semitism in the world is in the Middle East and North Africa. So the issue is dealing with Islam, challenging Islam to reform. The president of Egypt, Sisi, this week said it's time for us to reform. So he understands that the issue is Islam. Tom Friedman today in the New York Times quotes a journalist in Egypt who says, we have to deal with radical Islam. The president of France doesn't want to recognize it. The president of the United States doesn't recognize it. We are calling a conference in Washington on February 18th to deal with what? Radical extremism. Where, on the moon?
Abe, you mentioned that. Let's return to our friend Alan Dershowitz, Skyping in from Miami. Alan, you know, as a professor of law, definitions are very important. Abe has said there's a reluctance by our own president to classify this as Islamic terror. In the 30 seconds that remain, do you expect our president to finally conjoin the terms Islamic and terror?
Absolutely. I hope he will. There is a very close connection there. Obviously, he always has to say that most Muslims are peace-loving, but there is a radical element within Islam that uses Islam as a justification for turning against Jews. Just one more point about France. Paris, is the foreign policy is so hypocritical right from the beginning. Don't attack us and we'll leave you alone, terrorists. That's why they didn't want Netanyahu there. That's why they wanted to make this completely a French situation disconnected from Middle East terrorism. You can choose among your terrorists. You have to oppose all terrorism.
Alan, we appreciate the observation. We will continue with both our guests following this time out on America's Forum from Newsmax TV. Let's continue our conversation with the National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Abe Foxman, who joins us here in studio, and also via Skype from Miami, Harvard Law Professor Alan Dershowitz. Alan, this is a question for you because it has to do with international jurisprudence. Former President Jimmy Carter is calling for the International Criminal Court to investigate both Israel and Hamas for possible war crimes. He said it would, quote, be good for both sides, end quote. What is your reaction to that?
Well, nobody should listen to anything Jimmy Carter has to say about the Middle East. He's the reason that Israel and Palestine are still at war. He recommended to Yasser Arafat that Yasser Arafat turn down the deal that President Clinton and Ehud Barak offered, which would have resulted in a Palestinian state. He has the blood of thousands of Jews and Palestinians on his hands. He should just stop talking about the Middle East. The idea that the International Criminal Court should create moral equivalence between a democracy, which has the most moral army in the world and has fewer civilian casualties than any other army in history facing comparable threats, to a terrorist regime that includes Hamas, that commits multiple war crimes every time it sends a rocket, is so obnoxious and so hypocritical and so typical of Jimmy Carter that I think the world understands that he has made himself irrelevant and tossed himself into the trash pan of history.
Alan has an unvarnished assessment, to use the language of diplomacy, Abe, but the whole notion of President Carter, because history talks about the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel. Do you share the very graphic disappointment that
I could hear coming? He was echoing in the background.
Jimmy Carter's always had a problem with Jews, and I think it borders on anti-Semitism. You know, in the midst of this tragedy, in the midst of this serious debate, to again blame it on Israel, he said that the terrorism and the reason the Jews and there's anti-Semitism in Paris is because of the Arab-Israeli conflict. He sees the world through the Arab-Israeli. It's a perversion, it's a fixation, and I believe it's anti-Semitism. He can't get rid of it. And to now say the International Court of Justice will bring about a solution, yeah, I think Alan understates it. But it's sad because he was the president of the United States and people listen, and I think what we should do is stop listening to him.
Alan, you had another comment there. Go ahead, Alan Dershowitz.
Oh, I said it's the first time anybody's ever accused me of understatement. I appreciate that.
It's good, it's good.
Look, I really do think that we have to put the blame where the blame is. If the world continues to create moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel, it will only encourage Hamas to continue to fire rockets and continue to engage in terrorism, because what they want is moral equivalence. They want to be in the same room as a well-respected democracy and on the same plane. And it's an invitation to Hamas to continue to do this. And Jimmy Carter is going to have even more blood on his hands. The tragedy is that among some people in the world, he's respected and his word carries some weight. And that shouldn't be the case any more than Bishop Tutu, both of whom have a big Jewish problem. Jimmy Carter goes back to the time he was running for governor. He has a long, long history of theological anti-Semitism coupled with virulent anti-Israelism. He never met a terrorist he didn't like. He loved Yasser Arafat, and he hated every Israeli leader he ever met.
Abe, I want to bring it back to you. We were talking earlier about the Sunday March of Solidarity. And you mentioned that there was hypocrisy all over the place. How did you feel knowing that France did not want to invite Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but Abbas was there? You mentioned some other countries, but and our own president not being there, or the vice president.
One may have come as a result of the other. You know, to go back, I think if France stood up after the Toulouse attack, in Toulouse, 8 French people were killed by Muslim terrorists. 4 Jews died and 4 non-Jews. If there had been an outcry in Toulouse of 1 million Frenchmen saying that this anti-Semitism is not acceptable, maybe we would not have witnessed the tragedy that we witnessed. But there is another hypocrisy. 40, 50 heads of state marched in Paris. When you take a look at those countries, more than half do not have freedom of speech, do not respect freedom of expression. Marching on the front row was the Prime Minister of Turkey, Davutoglu. There are more journalists sitting in prison in Turkey today than in China. And yet they paraded in the name of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It was absolute hypocrisy. So I don't get so excited about Abu Mazen. It was offensive to have Abu Mazen, who is in a deal with Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. There's no debate about whether they are or they aren't. So he comes to march up front. We don't know yet the whole issue about Bibi Netanyahu. I think he was supposed to come on Tuesday for the funeral, that there were other plans. And he really came because of politics, because his competitors in Israel said they're coming and he had to come. That's not the issue. The issue is, why wasn't there a Paris march after 8 French people were killed, half of them Jews, an attack on a Jewish school? Had that happened, maybe would not have had to have the witness what we are
Abe
today.
Foxman, you bring an impassioned approach here. We've got about a minute and a half remaining. We would be remiss if we did not note in the calendar that come late July, I don't know if you're hanging up a sign that says "Gone Fishing," but you're taking a break.
But he's going to get you one.
So as you approach the time to depart the ADL, what is your fondest memory of your time there?
I haven't looked back yet. That's, I'm going to figure out how to rewire rather than retire. I'm going to look at Alan. I'm going to look at Alan. Alan, has stopped doing one thing, but he's out there as a voice. I will continue to be a voice. I will continue to speak out, maybe different platforms. I think probably the greatest looking back is a frustration that there is still a need of an Anti-Defamation League, that there's still a need for Alan and myself to speak out against the hypocrisy, against the racism, against the anti-Semitism. That's the frustration.
The world will miss Abe Foxman. He has contributed so enormously to not only the fight against anti-Semitism, but the fight for equality, the right for all the positive values that would make us a better world. We'll miss you, but we'll expect that you'll keep fighting for justice.
Fair enough. Alan Dershowitz, the author of the book Terror Tunnels, Skyping in from Miami. Abe Foxman, here at our anchor desk. Gentlemen, to you both, we appreciate the time. And Abe, it kind of sounded like you're angling for an invitation down to Alan's place at Miami Beach. In all sincerity, there is more to come here on America's Forum following this Newsmax Now update.